Ann Coulter, conservative columnist and thought leader extraordinaire. And Ann Coulter, we are going to ask you about Trump's Oval Office address tomorrow evening. This was an idea that you have been promoting for days, if not weeks. So first of all, are you on the inside track to serve as advisor to the president inside the White House?
7th, 2016. I do one interview on Breitbart Radio, and bam, days later. So apparently,
you volunteered.
No, I think it's Breitbart Radio. God bless Breitbart Radio. I've been recommending the Oval Office address since soon after November.
Write it too, by the way, Ann. Right here on Breitbart Radio, you volunteered to write it. That's why it got done, I think.
Well, yeah, so that's why I'm here tonight, and I'm not waiting until the speech is over to give the important points. Number one most important point is no amnesty for anyone. As my most loyal readers know, I've discussed this many times. I mean, we've done this before. We keep trying. Oh, this will be the last amnesty. We'll just do this one more amnesty. And the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, the 1986 amnesty under Reagan, it had, in addition to the general amnesty, there was the famed agricultural amnesty for the hardworking farm workers, and there were only supposed to be a couple 100,000 of them. It ended up amnestying well more than 1 million people, including 2 of the 1993 World Trade Center bombers. Well, one actually got a farm worker amnesty since he was working in the lush, fertile farmland of Brooklyn as a cab driver and the driver for the Blind Sheikh. The other one didn't actually get the amnesty, but under the law, of course, helpfully drafted by Chuck Schumer, simply applying for an amnesty put on hold your deportation. So the other one involved in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, he arrived well after the time to apply. Even he wasn't even eligible. Forget the fact that 800,000 of them had never worked on a farm and got amnesty anyway. This guy wasn't even in the country when you had to have been here to work on a farm. But it did delay his deportation, so luckily he was still in the country and could help with the bombing of the World Trade Center. They're both in a supermax prison in Colorado now, making our country so much more diverse. Similarly, just under the general amnesty of the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, 20 years later, the Ninth Circuit was still amnestying illegals under the act. They were actually applying on the grounds that, no, that's not fair. We weren't in the country when the last amnesty went through. So, okay, well, yes, we feel your pain. We're the Ninth Circuit. We'll just go ahead and amnesty you. You can't have any amnesty. You can't amnesty nuclear scientists. No amnesty. That's the most important point. And I think the second important thing he needs to do, and I think he's great at this, by the way, it's not like we're asking Trump to do something outside of his wheelhouse. He can be very presidential. He can have a lot of gravitas, despite what you constantly hear on TV. He doesn't demonstrate it often, but I always tell people to go back and look at his introduction of Brett Kavanaugh as the Supreme Court nominee. He was more presidential than anyone since Reagan in that. It was sort of a different and very impressive Trump. When he wants to, he can. The objective of this speech, and I thought the objective of this speech from the beginning, right after the election, was that he should say something like, you say a lot of wild things on the campaign trail. I'm speaking to big rallies, but I want to talk to America about a serious problem that is affecting the least among us, the working class, blue-collar workers, people who depend on government services, parents whose kids are addicted to heroin. This is and the illegal aliens themselves being dragged by coyotes and Mexican drug cartels through dangerous pathways in the desert, kids dying, women being raped. We have to turn off the magnet. That is the humanitarian solution. I think we can all come together and care about our fellow Americans. The point of this being, I think a lot of people, the New York Times, for example, will not give a fair description of why people like me want a wall. They will not. I sent the explanation to Peter Baker this weekend. I said I'm giving it to no one else. Here are 3 or whatever it was, 4 very quick points, and literally quick, like one sentence each point. I said, use it all or don't use any of it, because I know how they can chop up a quote and make you seem to be saying the opposite of what you were saying. So, of course, he used none of it. And I emailed him back saying, someplace in the newspaper of record, you ought to give a description of why we want a wall. It is the compassionate solution. I think a lot of independents and Democrats and people who could be convinced, idiot millennials, they just see the whole wall as part of the lock her up and crooked Hillary. It seems like a mean thing, and you hear 24 hours a day that it's racist. No, we are the ones with compassion. We have compassion for our fellow Americans. We have compassion for the illegals being dragged through the desert. And if he gives a serious speech without talking about Mexican rapists, which was a great introductory speech, but not that sort of tone. It's only his tone that needs to change, and a lot of the facts about illegal immigration and what it's doing to America.
All right, so you've walked us through several points there. First of all, no amnesty. It's got to make it clear.
Yes.
Right. Secondly,
I'm terrified of that because of the headlines this weekend about Jared on the wall negotiating team, and he thought he had come up with a great new idea. We'll trade amnesty for the wall.
Well, what's interesting is that Lindsey Graham came out of a White House luncheon about a week ago and said, we're not going to offer any kind of amnesty. Maybe the most we'll offer is work permits, an extension, one-time extension of work permits. But he said the Democrats walked away from the deal that Trump offered them last year. And remember, Trump, in his State of the Union last year, offered 1.8 million Dreamers, including 1 million that hadn't signed up for the government program. He offered them amnesty in exchange for the wall, and Democrats wouldn't take it. So Lindsey Graham is saying, Lindsey Graham, if I can use he has said, I am with the president in rejecting that deal. There's not going to be a deal. They're not going to see a deal like that again. And I think that's right. If you walk away from that deal, you don't get to take that second opportunity. Now, I didn't even think the president would put that on the table because from my perspective, I'm thinking he's got to make it clear that we're not going to let the government open before we resolve this issue. That's what Democrats are all saying right now, right? That we've got to have this discussion after the government reopens. Then we can talk about it. I think Trump has to make it clear that he's not budging on that because that's just like saying we can negotiate after you've already given me everything I want.
Yes, which has been the president's approach thus far. And we're trying to stop him from doing that again. In fact, that's been the approach of every politician thus far. They don't want a wall because their rich Republican donors want the cheap labor.
And one of the issues that the Democrats want to do, one of the things they want to do is they want to declare that this isn't a crisis at all. This is just Trump and his crazy notions, and this isn't a big deal, and he's making something out of this, and it's just all political with him. How can he explain and show really that this is a crisis, that this is a real crisis, this isn't a made-up crisis, and this is a man who a lot of people will say that he's, because he likes to talk big and talk about big, beautiful things, and he uses a lot of hyperbole. How can he make clear that this isn't hyperbole, this is a real crisis?
I think the heroin deaths are a pretty big deal. I don't think that can be talked about enough. I mean, yes, I would also go to all of the working class in America, and how construction workers in particular, their salaries have not just stagnated. They have gone down in the last 20 years. I think I read that in Breitbart, a comparison of what roofers in California were making today versus 20 years ago. Why? Because illegal immigrants are coming in and undercutting their wages. These are the least among us. We are the only ones who are not speaking out of self-interest. You, me, the president, the people who want a wall. Maybe many of them support it because they actually are roofers. But I'm not a union union bookkeeper. I'm not working at I don't know, a fast food joint. It's not my emergency room or the schools in my neck of the woods that are being overwhelmed with illegals. Most of the people who are advocating for open borders, although they pretend they aren't, that is what we're talking about here. If we don't close the border, they have a vested interest in having either the cheap labor or the Democratic voters. Their neighborhoods aren't the ones being overwhelmed. They get the cheap maids, the cheap nannies, and then they strut around like they're Martin Luther King. No, you are talking in your self-interest chamber of commerce and Koch brothers and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. It's Donald Trump and our side who are actually caring about our fellow Americans, the kids who are getting addicted to black tar heroin. You can try to blame the kids, but I'm sorry, we were not ferociously writing letters to the drug cartels. Please bring us black tar heroin. We demand. We want it here in Southern Ohio. And the cartels finally say, "Oh, okay, we'll sell it to you." No, nobody was asking for black tar heroin. They brought it in. They delivered it like dominoes. You can read about it in that great book Dreamland by Sam Tannenhouse. The heroin problem in this country is 100% a problem of not having a wall on the border, and 70,000 Americans are dying every year. Because that's more than died in the entire course of the Vietnam War. That is a national emergency. I would talk about the heroin. I would talk about the black underclass who don't have jobs because they're being undercut. I mean, right as African Americans, right as the Civil Rights Bill is passed, and you have African Americans, and I mean African Americans, not Somali Americans, black Americans, right as they're breaking into the middle class, and the federal government is demanding that they be given their share of the American dream. Teddy Kennedy's Immigration Act dumps 30 million low-wage workers on the country, undercutting their wages at every turn. I mean, one of the most beautiful parts of Trump's immigration plan was where he said that he would take money out of all of these immigrant services programs and dedicate it to money for inner city kids who need a leg up. We are the compassionate ones here. This is not a mean thing. This is not an immoral thing. This is not a racist thing. We are the ones who are standing up for the least among us of every ethnicity. Hispanic low-wage workers, Hispanics getting addicted to heroin, blacks and whites getting addicted to heroin and being underbid by illegal immigrants. This is a national emergency for the people who don't have lobbyists in Washington.
Amazing. Well, let's talk about the Democrats' response. Now, I saw Jerry Nadler, who is now the head of the House Judiciary Committee, down at the border today. CNN was playing footage, and he says he expects the president to lie. That's what they are telling their supporters, that they are upset that the president's going to lie. And this is basically echoing CNN's talking point. Brian Stelter has been arguing for a while now that networks that show President Trump's rallies and speeches, if they show them at all, should show them on a delay so that the networks can respond ahead of time to any lies or inaccuracies the president may use. This is a unique standard to Donald Trump, of course, because it's not as if presidents have ever said erroneous or misleading things before. But that's the setup. They are telling the public not to listen to the president. Yeah. Some are going further. They're saying we've got to boycott the president. Now Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi want equal time. CNN just gave it to them to respond to the president, which is sort of unheard of for an Oval Office address. But what do you think of the Democrats' strategy here? Is there anything to what they're saying? Is it going to work? Are people just going to say Trump lies and tune out?
That's a great question, and it shows you how powerful this issue is and how it's a winning issue for the president. They are terrified of this Oval Office address. They know, and please God, let Trump be good Trump and gravitas Trump and presidential Trump, which he can do. I've seen him do it. He does it better than either president of our President Bush, is certainly a million times better than somebody like John McCain, better than Mitt Romney could do it. He is, when he wants to be serious, he can be. They are terrified of this address. And like you say, they're already, I just saw CNN talking about, David Axelrod said this is a big mistake. Trump is very bad at this, and it's not going to work, and it's going to have to be short. And I'm listening to all of these things that don't make any sense. Look, they lie so much about the immigration issue. These, just to take one example that happens to drive me crazy, these BS polls that they, no, you can't see the question. No, Americans hate the wall. They don't want the wall. Look, Congress has tried to slip through 3 amnesties in the last decade, and what shut it down? It wasn't one political party. It wasn't the Republicans standing up and saying, "No, we can't have an amnesty." No, again, their donors want the cheap workers. It wasn't the Democrats because they want the Democratic voters. It was somehow the American people finding out about the amnesty. I mean, even Rubio's amnesty, the most terrifying one, because it was supported by an awful lot of prominent Fox News and talk radio hosts. Wow, I thought this is the end of the world. But no, somehow the word got out to the American people. Breitbart, I guess, and Drudge and Phyllis Schlafly. Somehow the American people found out they're trying to do it again. They're trying to push another amnesty through, and they shut down the congressional switchboards. How many times do unorganized Americans, just regular people, have to win on this issue? Every time the American people, whether it is, go back to, Proposition, whatever it was in California that won the election for Pete Wilson. Well, what was that, 187?
It was 187, and I was just writing about it today because, of course, it was overturned by the courts. It seems that whenever voters pass anything that liberals don't like in California, the courts overturn it and it doesn't matter. This is what democracy looks like.
Popular. It won with a majority of white people in California, a majority of Asians, a majority of African Americans in California, and I forget what it was, but it was something like 33% of Hispanic voters, the most any Republican is ever going to get from Hispanic voters. It carried Pete Wilson, who was very unpopular then, to a huge re-election, and with a lot of black votes, more than the average Republican got that year. It has been consistently lied about, as they are lying right now about the wall and about Trump's speech, because Democrats and the Chamber of Commerce, they know they can't win as long as people are allowed to hear the truth. They're also not giving us the truth. Boy, you want to talk about liars, just this constant lying we keep getting. And so to get back to what I was saying, the polls, look, every time we vote, every time Americans have the opportunity to vote on immigration, whether it's benefits for immigrants or amnesty or vote for Donald Trump, they vote for less immigration. They vote for the wall. They vote for no benefits for illegals. That poll counts more than these absolute nonsense, poorly written push polls being designed by the media so that they can produce a headline saying most Americans oppose the wall. No, they don't. They support the wall. We put Donald Trump in the White House. I remember that election day thinking, what else do we have to do? Donald Trump is not your typical candidate for any office. He is certainly not your typical candidate or president. And yet the people voted for him. His signature campaign promise was that he would build a wall. That is how popular the wall is.
Okay, so it's about political legitimacy in some way, isn't it? Because if we elect people and they don't do what they are committing themselves to do, and we understand there's opposition to it, and they may have to modify, compromise, et cetera, whatever. But if they don't do that, that says something about our system, doesn't it? I mean, this is Trump basically squaring with the voters in the Oval Office.
Yes, that is a totally great point. We have been betrayed by politicians so many times on immigration. That's, as I always say, that was a big part of Trump's appeal. The more coarse and vulgar and preposterous he was, almost the more believable he was. The more you saw these Republicans going on Fox News and saying, he's not a real Republican, the more it made him seem believable. Yes, fantastic. Thanks for reminding me. He's not a real Republican. Now I know why I liked this guy. He was so out of the normal ladder of how you become president. and so seemed so not to care about elite opinion, his promises on immigration were the more believable. If even Donald Trump betrays us, not only is he finished, but I mean, that's a good question about what is the point? It's like Brexit. We vote and we vote and we vote and we keep voting for a wall and we keep voting for less immigration and we keep voting for no amnesty, and Washington will not give it to us. If even Trump won't give it to us, yeah, well, it's going to be the end of the country anyway if Trump doesn't fulfill his immigration promises. So I suppose political legitimacy is just, throw that onto the pile of there being no possibility of ever having another Republican president.
But you know what, Ann Coulter, your concerns were listened to. None other than Joe Biden himself has blamed the shutdown, and I quote, the conservative blonde woman, meaning you. So apparently your concerns were heard so clearly that you're responsible for the government shutdown. So
hashtag me too, by the way.
Right, that's right. Well, as you may have seen on Twitter, I worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I dated one of Biden's staffers. He's just senile. But as you also know, I give most of the credit to Matt Drudge and the Drudge Report. I mean, that's how I found out about it. That the Trump administration said, "Oh yeah, don't worry about the wall funding." And of course, Rush Limbaugh. I mean, he is the most heard, most prominent, most important conservative commentator in the country. And thank God he doesn't work for Fox News. And no one came to him and said, "Oh yeah, let's not mention this. We're going to be sucking up to Trump today." So I'll give full credit to Matt Drudge and Rush Limbaugh, though I do give a lot of credit to Breitbart for running our last interview.
Yeah, because as you mentioned in the last interview, when we asked you, if you'd write it, and you were like, you volunteered to, so I've gotten so many people tweeting me, texting me, saying, "Is Ann going to write this the speech tomorrow?" Because they were absolutely responsive to your suggestion there, and our lines actually lit up yesterday after you suggested it, because people want to read that speech and hear it, and they now will hear a speech.
Well, I fully trust Stephen Miller on this, though I would want to put Miller. What Trump needs is not to give an inch on the policy, not on what he promised his voters, but all along I thought, it was really fun on the campaign trail. I went to a lot of those rallies. I introduced him at rallies. It was fun and exciting, and he got the crowd going. Okay, this is going to be the same substance, but a totally different tone. Now he's going to be compassionate, Trump, because this is, I've said it before, it can't be said often enough, the wall is the compassionate solution. The people who don't want a wall are absolutely selfish. They are in it for themselves. They are in it for the cheap labor. They are in it for the votes. They don't care about African Americans. They don't care about Hispanic Americans. They don't care about the most voiceless Americans out there who are dying from heroin, who can't support their families because they can't get a good paying job. They're being undercut all the time by illegal aliens and all the cheap labor coming in legally at the same time, I might add. They have no compassion for the women and children being raped and abused by the cartels, getting up to our border so that they can get through, because we don't have a wall. And they know if they just make it through all of the rapes and child abuse, get to the border, they'll get a free doctor, thanks to Kirstjen Nielsen, HHS secretary, and they'll get in and get on the American gravy train. It is not compassionate what any of these people are doing. We have the compassionate solution, and that's what I think Trump needs to communicate.
Another point about compassion, and I just put up a piece at Breitbart, 7 things Trump should say in the speech from the Oval Office. I think he should talk about that corporal we talked about last week who was laid to rest a few days ago, Corporal Ronald Singh, the legal immigrant who joined the police force and was killed by an illegal alien. And I think that case really illustrates the compassion argument, that you're turning your back on those who obey the law by giving amnesty to people who don't, and by making sure that there are more of them coming in. And they're a danger to Americans, but they're also a threat to what we believe about our country, that we uphold the rule of law. And here's a guy who died defending the rule of law, who lived also upholding the rule of law in the way he came to this country and what he did. I think the president's got to talk about that. I know he spoke to the family last week, but I think that's a very powerful point. And the media are ignoring it for the most part. They don't want to talk about it.
It's stunning how the media are ignoring that story. That is only on conservative media. It is a really touching story. It's a heartbreaking story. He seems like such a wonderful man. Also the son of this fire captain who was killed by a drunk driving illegal alien. That was just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And you remind me, yes, these people who come here legally, I'm sure you guys out in California, I certainly have a lot of immigrant friends, a shocking number of immigrant friends, and not only do they agree with me, with us, with Adios America, because America was the country they wanted to live in. They didn't choose El Salvador or Honduras or Mexico or Bangladesh. They wanted to live in America. So for all of the cultural reasons, they're often more enraged than I am about the absence of a wall. But the other thing they always say to me, I mean, just last night, it took us years. It took us years to immigrate here legally, and these criminals, drug dealers, human smugglers. Oh, they just even the lovely ones who would make a fine gardener and be gregarious and friendly. They just breeze across. To honor, as you say, the rule of law. And the fact that Democrats love saying this about this one election, a totally typical election, the party in power loses the House in the first midterm election, but elections have consequences, elections have consequences. Yeah, okay, one area they have never had consequences in when it comes to promises on immigration. So Trump has really got to fulfill his promises on immigration.
I just want to quote my wife here, which I don't do too often, but she often has the reaction when people are trying to turn America into a European socialist country, like 70% taxation and all that stuff. And my wife is an immigrant, and she says, can't there be one place in the world that's America? I mean, can't there just be one place that does it different?
Yes, exactly right. Yes, bless her. Yes. No, that's absolutely right.
A lot of these countries, I mean, if you look at the countries that have walls, we're told the walls are immoral and racist. I mean, the European Union has built something like 1,000 kilometers of fencing or walls to keep migrants out. Israel, of course, has a border. And Botswana built a fence with Zimbabwe. This is, we're told that walls are racist. Well, somebody forgot to tell Botswana because they built a fence with Zimbabwe basically to keep foot and mouth disease out of the country, which is a really big problem if you have a lot of cattle. And for whatever reason, it's not as if these things are immoral or racist. I mean, the reason people use them is they work. So
yes.
I think Trump has to say that as well. And if a tiny African country with 1.5 million people and a GDP that's not even a fraction of ours can build a fence along the border, but we can't find $5 million in however many trillions of a budget. I think he has to give that to people and say, look, at the scale of this thing is just absurd.
Yes, and one other thing you just reminded me of. I mean, I've said all along he's the commander-in-chief. He knows he has authority to bomb Syria when he wants to. He certainly has authority to protect the borders of the United States. But I do think it's important for political reasons that he win this shutdown fight. It's important because there is so much nonsense and lies about immigration right now coming from every possible media outlet. We really need to hear the other side from Trump.
Yeah.
And I want to get the Democrats to vote on this. This is going to hurt them if the case is made properly, and I do think Trump can deliver the case properly.
Well, we'll see tomorrow evening. Thanks so much. And we're just always thrilled when you join us here on Breitbart News Tonight. And you're already changing the world, changing the debate, so keep on coming back. We'd love to see and hear your reactions afterwards. It's been incredible.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Great to talk to you guys.